We're having a lot of fun.
The things that are said. Yes, Pete, you are live on TV.
Back.
Do you have any final thoughts?
No, we talked in the morning early on that I was one of the first ones on the show, and it's like watching a baby grow. Now you're all grown up. Outnumbered. You got outnumbered overtime. I mean, it's a fantastic show. You guys do a great
How to
job.
respond to that.
It was
a
sent
good
in
show.
love.
Yeah, that's lovely.
Yes,
Something.
Harris.
Yeah.
It was a
And your
good show.
spirit, which is wonderful.
But yes, I mean, it is just, it felt like a Friday. We had so much fun on this couch today.
We really did.
Excellent.
Thank you.
That's what we're trying to do.
All right. All right.
Thanks for having
Yeah,
me.
that's it for us. We're going to hand it over to Harris.
Good luck, Harris.
We'll start with this big news. High-stakes talks to try to salvage the summit with North Korea have wrapped up. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo met earlier today with a top North Korean official to lay the groundwork to get that meeting back on track. As we go outnumbered overtime, I'm Harris Faulkner. We are now awaiting a briefing from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo after he met with North Korea's Kim Jong-chol earlier today. They also dined together last night. The State Department says these meetings went well and they made some progress. The goal? To try to salvage that summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un. President Trump spoke about the talks earlier. Watch.
Our Secretary of State has had very good meetings. He's meeting again today. I believe they'll be coming down to Washington on Friday, and a letter is going to be delivered to me from Kim Jong-un. So I look forward to seeing what's in the letter.
David Lee Miller is live in New York City with more on this. David Lee.
Harris, we expect that briefing by the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, to get underway in about 1 hour's time here at this Midtown Hotel. What's notable about what took place today is that the meeting between the two delegations lasted only about 2.5 hours, a little less than that, and all indications are that things went very well. The Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, sent out a tweet a short time ago that said, quote, substantive talks with the team from North Korea. We discussed our priorities for the potential summit between our leaders. And the State Department also sent out a brief statement that said the Secretary's meeting ended early as a result of the parties making progress and the meeting going well. So far, though, not a word from the North Korean delegation led by the Workers' Party Vice Chair, Kim Jong-chol. A senior State Department official says North Korea has indicated it wants security as an outcome of a summit. The official added, we have to convince them that nukes only make them less secure. Secretary Pompeo has said the U.S. is committed to a complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization. And in addition to the talks taking place in New York City today, there were also talks between North Korea and the U.S. taking place overseas in Singapore, where a presumed summit would take place. Two delegations there discussed the issue of logistics as well as security. And in the demilitarized zone, representatives from the U.S. and North Korea also met. They were trying to come up with an agenda for a meeting, as well as some type of declaration if, in fact, the two sides have a successful summit. But the bottom line here is all eyes were really on the events unfolding in New York City. A senior State Department official described the two officials that were meeting here as the top dogs and saying that what they would decide would ultimately really determine if, in fact, a summit is going to take place. We expect to learn a great deal more in about 1 hour's time when the Secretary of State holds a briefing here in Midtown Manhattan. That's the latest, Harris. Back to you.
David Lee Miller, thank you very much. Let's bring in Republican Congressman from New York, Peter King. He's a member of the House Homeland Security Committee and House Intelligence Committee as well. Great to see you today, Congressman.
Thank you, Harris. Thank you very much.
I want to start with the reports that the meeting went well. What does that indicate to you?
It indicates that at least on the surface, Kim Jong-chol was saying that they do accept the principle of denuclearization. Listen, I have great faith in Mike Pompeo. I work with Mike on the Intelligence Committee. He was outstanding head of the CIA. He's a tough negotiator. And again, I think we're still at the early stages of this. Even though it's been going on for a few months now, it's still at the early stages. And I think North Korea is getting the message that Donald Trump is for real, that President Trump is not just looking for an easy deal, and that there have to be real results. Now, what's going to happen as this plays out, we don't know. But I would say it's a good start today. I think Mike Pompeo is getting the message across that the U.S. is serious and that they have to, and that North Korea has to be serious about denuclearization. Now, if they follow through on that, that's a whole different story, because in some ways the only reason North Korea exists is because of its nuclear weapons. So this is going to be a tough process, but I feel very good today after the meeting. I don't think Mike Pompeo or his spokesman would have said that it went positively if it didn't.
Congressman King, what leverage does the president and thereby the United States have in negotiations?
I think we have several bits of pieces of leverage. One is that I still believe that we can use China. The fact the president reinstated the tariffs the other day on China, I think that is putting pressure on China to put pressure on North Korea. North Korea realizes that President Trump is serious and he's not going to back down on the issue of denuclearization. I think for the first time, they see that they have an adversary who is willing to follow through if he has to. I don't want to go any further than that, but I think they see a real competitor out there in President Trump, and also with China. So I would say the combination of the two, and also these sanctions, are having a real impact on North Korea. So again, there's the combination of sanctions on North Korea. I believe some pressure from China. Now, China's trying to have it both ways. But again, I think the fact the president reinstated the tariffs on China shows China that the president is onto their game.
All right, I want to read this. This is coming from Reuters. They're calling it an exclusive, talking with President Trump, saying that the president told Reuters it may take more than one meeting to seal a denuclearization deal with North Korea, says he will most likely be visited by North Korean envoy Kim Yong-chol on Friday at the White House. Your response?
Yeah, I think it most likely will take more than one meeting. I mean, one way or another, this has been going on now for 65 years, ever since the armistice in 1953. So I don't expect it to be resolved in one meeting, but I do believe that meeting can certainly set a tone to make it clear to Kim Jong-un how serious President Trump is. Now he's going to keep the pressure on, and that pressure will come through both China and also U.S. sanctions, and in fact world sanctions on North Korea. So I see this process starting, but it's important. And I just wish that more American political leaders would stand behind the president, put aside partisan politics for a while, and really show a united front against North Korea. We are standing with the president.
Do you feel that's not happening? And by the way, I have Democrat Garamendi from California on right after you. So this is an opportunity now. What do you want Democrats to do? Do you feel that that cohesion's not happening?
I don't believe it is. It seems like too quick. Like last week when it appeared that someone was being called off, they were coming in quick to criticize the president. Listen, I stood by President Obama as much as I could on foreign policy. Again, if after it's over, said and done, that's one thing. Or after a decision like the agreement with Iran was signed, that's an area where, to me, you should be voicing your opinion. But right now, and it's so sensitive with these talks coming up, let's see what happens. Let's see if the talks come about. Let's see what happens on June 12th, and then hold your fire until then. And there's enough to criticize afterwards if they want to, but let it go until between now and then, so Kim Jong-un knows that the American people and the Congress and the Senate are standing behind the president in demanding denuclearization.
Representative Pete King, I'm going to use your very words in my next interview, because that was a call out for a united front, as I understand it. Great to see you today. Thank you for being on the program.
You can tell John I said hello. He's a good guy.
I will. He can probably hear you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's bring in Democrat Congressman John Garamendi. You heard Representative King saying hello to you there. I want to tell our audience and remind them that you are a member of the House Armed Services Committee. So you heard the congressman there. Let's just start there. Yeah. A united front. Yeah. Why isn't that happening?
Well, I think it is. I really do think it is. I know that all the Democrats are as concerned as is the president, and certainly Peter and the Republicans, about North Korea's nuclear weapons and their international or their ICBMs. We all are concerned about that, and we all know that there are only three paths to deal with this. One path is the negotiations, which are now underway. The second path is a war. And the third path is to simply accept the fact that North Korea has nuclear weapons and will continue to threaten the United States. A war and nuclear weapons by North Korea are not an acceptable path. And so negotiations are critically important, and I know that myself and every other Democrat that I'm aware of encourages negotiations. Now, Peter mentioned last week and the whiplash that really the entire world endured when the president met with President Moon of South Korea, and then 24 hours, 48 hours later, I think all is which are now underway. The second path is a war, and the third path is to simply accept the fact that North Korea has nuclear weapons and will continue to threaten the United States. A war and nuclear weapons by North Korea are not an acceptable path. And so negotiations are critically important, and I know that myself and every other Democrat that I'm aware of encourages negotiations. Now, Peter mentioned last week and the whiplash that really the entire world endured when the president met with President Moon of South Korea, and then 24 hours, 48 hours later, canceled the meeting, and then another 24 hours after that wanted to get it back on. I think all of us, and probably Peter also, were concerned about what all of that was about. But nonetheless, we want these negotiations to succeed. And Peter said something else that's very, very important, and that is this is an extraordinarily complex situation. You'd have not only the United States engaged now with North Korea, but also keep in mind that South Korea
Rudy Giuliani has told Fox News that he and President Trump have been going over some of the questions special counsel Robert Mueller wants to ask the president. But he says they won't agree to an interview until their conditions are met, including getting all available information on the FBI informant who met with Trump campaign officials and the DOJ memo detailing the scope of the Russia investigation. This is Giuliani has launched a new attack against the special counsel. Watch.
There is no evidence, which I assume there is no evidence. Then, I mean, he shouldn't testify. The whole thing should be squashed. I mean, it should be ended immediately. You got a group there that's a lynching mob. So let them do their job. And boy, we're ready to knock the heck out of you with our report, which will be authoritative.
Have been keeping up on the daily, but Rudy red lines in order for the president to sit down and do an interview with Robert Mueller. And all of the Trump prep sessions that the president would be doing if he were to agree to an interview with Robert Mueller. A lot of this has also been keeping up on the daily flow of news. But Rudy Giuliani, as you alluded to, did illuminate a couple of what he described as red lines in order for the president to sit down and do an interview with Robert Mueller. And that would be all of the memorandums, all of the intelligence on the confidential informant that made contact with several members of the Trump campaign back in 2016, what the president is referring to as Spygate. And you also mentioned the quote, the so-called quote, scope memo that Rod Rosenstein wrote that gave Robert Mueller, the special counsel, the authority to investigate and in what areas he would be able to investigate in. Here's what Giuliani told our Sean Hannity last night.
I want to see the documents, which Trey Gowdy has never seen, which is outrageous. And I'm not going to let my client testify, the President of the United States, even if he wants to, without those documents being produced. If and when we find that this was handled appropriately, and there's some evidence on which they could base this phony investigation, will we have him testify?
Yeah, you might take that is quite a high bar that Mueller would have to leap before Giuliani and the president and Jay Sekulow, his other attorney, agree to an interview. And you would be right. They're definitely setting a high bar. Giuliani spent about an hour with the president last night. He said that they also talked frequently on the telephone. He was hoping to spend more time with the president this week, but because North Korea is now on a rolling boil, that's taking up most of the president's time. Giuliani told me that they will likely do some sort of prep with the president, even if he doesn't agree to a sit-down interview with Robert Mueller. You heard him talk about it earlier, Harris, that the president's legal team is going to be writing some sort of report, either in response to the Mueller report or just their reports to get their side of the story out. They do want to sit down with the president and go over in excruciating detail what it is that he knows so that they can get that report as detailed as possible. Giuliani also told me he's not happy that the president brought up Jeff Sessions again yesterday. Giuliani feeling that they were really making some headway with questioning the whole genesis of the Russia investigation, possible misconduct on the part of some high-ranking officials at the FBI, and now the president getting out there and smacking Sessions upside the head has just created an alternate narrative to where they were going. Harris?
Figuratively, obviously. John, you touched on something, and I'm about to talk with former Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski, so I'll bring this up with him. You said that for the purpose of this report that may come out, that they're still going to do these practice sessions or whatever we're calling them. I just want to make sure I heard you right.
Yeah, I think what they would probably do is they would ask the president the questions that Robert Mueller wanted to ask him. Don't know how many. Remember, there were 52 in the latest list that was obtained by Fox News, just so that they get a full accounting of what the president knows about all of the areas that Robert Mueller wants to investigate, so that when they write their report, they have a fully detailed and comprehensive recollection from the president.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. And now let's bring in Corey Lewandowski, author of the New York Times bestseller, Let Trump Be Trump. Great to see you, Corey.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with these so-called practice sessions, prep sessions, Q&A. What do you think those are like? I mean, we got a few leaked information about some of the questions that might be asked, but talk to me about what you think the process is like.
Well, you know, and I have no inside knowledge of this, but what I think this is the president's attorneys sitting down with him and having conversations of what potentially the Mueller investigative team would be asking him. Whether they agree to that sit down or not is irrelevant. They want to make sure the president is thinking through some of the questions that the Mueller team has submitted over, understanding and recalling what may or may not be on the agenda. Remember, this investigation goes back now to the beginning of what was really the 2016 campaign, but started in June of 2015. So you're now 3 years ago of when the campaign actually launched. And so having the opportunity to recall some of the facts that the Mueller team may be interested in would be my guess of what his attorneys are trying to talk to him about.
Interesting. So you saw Rudy Giuliani. He does not mince words. And he said, look, September 1st, you got to wrap up this investigation. He has a high bar for whether the president will sit down with him. I want to talk about Robert Mueller, though, and get your thoughts on whether or not you think he would ever bow to any pressure.
You know, from what I know of Bob Mueller, he's a man who has a lot of integrity, and I think he is concerned about the potential impact in the midterm elections. That being said, I would expedite the report that the Mueller team is going to put out, if they have finished their interviews with the individuals who they want to talk to, except the president, it sounds like they have the opportunity now to have that report basically concluded. And that's very important because you don't want to politicize this issue any more than it's already been done. And if the investigation is done or very close to done, the Mueller team should finish that report, submit it to the Department of Justice, and have that finalized by Labor Day.
Corey, do you think that Giuliani gets it right when he says that the president will not fire Jeff Sessions or Robert Mueller?
I do. I think and again, I haven't spoken to the president directly about it, but I think this president is allowing the Mueller team to finish their investigation to prove what we already know. There was no collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians or anybody else for that matter. Donald Trump won this election in a blowout with over 300 electoral votes. There was no collusion here whatsoever, and the president wants to make sure the American people are reminded of that. And Bob Mueller's team has to remind the American people that there was only one campaign that took campaign money and went and used it overseas to put together a false dossier, and that was the Clinton campaign.
Do you think the president sits down? You heard Giuliani, FBI informant information, and he wants the DOJ documents that even Congressman Trey Gowdy has not seen. Your last words.
Look, I would not recommend the president sitting down with Bob Mueller. As we know, what
even
the Mueller
with those
team,
conditions.
Look, I don't think so. Look, there was no collusion. The Mueller investigators have had the opportunity to sit down with dozens, if not hundreds, of individuals to ask them questions. I'm sure they've all gotten the same answer. No collusion between the president and Russia or anyone else for that matter. So there's no value, in my opinion, of the president sitting down with the Mueller team.
Yeah. Politically, maybe a different story. We'll talk about that on a different day. Corey Lewandowski, thank you. Great to see you.
Thank you.
New details now about that confidential memo that former Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe wrote and turned over to the special counsel Robert Mueller. We'll tell you what's in it and the impact that this could have on the Russia investigation. Judge Andrew Napolitano will weigh in after the commercial break. Plus, President Trump imposing sweeping new tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from the European Union, Canada, and Mexico. He says he wants fair trade, fair for the United States. How are the nations responding? Next. This is developing. We're learning new details about a confidential memo that former FBI Director Andrew McCabe turned over to special counsel Robert Mueller that he wrote about James Comey's firing. A source has told Fox News the memo recounts a conversation McCabe had with Rod Rosenstein that led him to believe the Deputy Attorney General could be trying to cover for President Trump. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge now in Washington, first with the facts and the details. Catherine?
Well, thank you, Harrison. Good afternoon. A source familiar with the memos tells Fox News that former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe documented a meeting where Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein said President Trump wanted Rosenstein to include Russia in the memo used to fire FBI Director James Comey last May. Rosenstein, we understand, declined. The source said Rosenstein did give McCabe a copy of a draft letter firing Comey written by President Trump, and that letter has since been passed on to special counsel Robert Mueller as part of his investigation. Writing on Twitter this morning, the president said, "Not that it matters, but I never fired James Comey because of Russia. The corrupt mainstream media loves to keep pushing that narrative, but they know it's not true." Earlier today on Fox, the president's spokesman went further.
He said on national television it's because of James Comey's handling of the Clinton investigation and the letter that the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein had sent him. There are also a number of reasons. He's leaked confidential information. He gave false statements under oath to Congress.
Andrew McCabe testified on Capitol Hill earlier this year and was fired in March, just days before his FBI retirement, after the Justice Department's internal watchdog concluded McCabe lied to federal investigators multiple times about his media contact before the 2016 election. This report from Justice Department Inspector General Michael E. Horowitz found that McCabe, quote, lacked candor, including under oath on multiple occasions. The Inspector General also concluded that McCabe's disclosure of the existence of an ongoing investigation in the manner described in this report violated the FBI's and the department's media policy and constituted misconduct. For his part, McCabe disputes the findings, telling the Inspector General that his boss, Director Comey, knew about the outreach to the Wall Street Journal. The Inspector General's findings were referred to the U.S. Attorney here in Washington for possible prosecution under what's called 18 U.S.C. 1001, which makes it a crime to lie to federal investigators. In the meantime, we are expecting more from the Inspector General and his findings on the FBI and the Justice Department's conduct leading up to the 2016 election, specifically the Clinton email case, and that could happen really within the next week or so, Harris.
All right, Catherine, thank you very much. Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano with me now. Let's start with Rod Rosenstein. Is he in trouble over this memo?
Well, he's not in trouble in that he's done anything wrong or he could be prosecuted, but his life could become very complicated, more so than it already is, if it is determined that he needs to recuse himself. Now, Jeff Sessions recused himself on the Russia investigation. Why? Because he is a witness. It now appears that Rod Rosenstein may be a witness. Attorney General Sessions, a witness to whether there was any Russian involvement. Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein, a witness to did the president fire Jim Comey for a valid, lawful purpose or a corrupt purpose? If the latter, that's potentially obstruction of justice.
You know, in your kind of what I call a legal brief that you supply us with sometimes, you called this memo sophomoric. Why do you term it that way?
The memo that I referred to as sophomoric is the one that Rod Rosenstein gave to the president to justify the firing of Jim Comey, because the reason given was Jim Comey's not recommending the prosecution of Hillary Clinton. The reason I call it sophomoric is because if that is the true reason, then Hillary Clinton should have been prosecuted by the Jeff Sessions Justice Department, and she hasn't been, and the statute of limitations is ticking away.
And around we go. So if we look at the situation and actually have two men recusing themselves, why wouldn't the president fire them? Because Rod Rosenstein is supposed to be the backup. I mean, he's the deputy AG, and you've got such. And I realize that it's for different reasons why a potential recusal would happen in his part. I mean, but it's complicated. Then
this would be unprecedented in American history. This would
to have the AG and the deputy AG
correct. While so many DOJ assets are being devoted to an investigation of the president himself. This is clearly the biggest thing going on in the DOJ. There are 90,000 employees in the DOJ. This is a huge project that Bob Mueller runs. His boss would be someone no one's ever heard of. Not someone really accountable to the public.
You mean if both these men are removed or recused?
Yes, the next person in line who's been confirmed by the Senate. It has to be a member of the hierarchy who's been confirmed by the Senate. Is a guy named Noel Francisco, not a household name. He is the Solicitor General of the United States. He is an academic who argues before the Supreme Court. Suddenly, he's going to be in charge of the biggest criminal investigation in the modern era, where the target or subject is the president.
And just because we don't know him, right, doesn't mean he can't do it. And look, we don't know if Rod Rosenstein is going to recuse himself, but if what you're saying today is true and plays out, he's really in a complicated position.
Yes, and all of this comes down to the following. The President of the United States under the Constitution is the chief law enforcement officer in the land, and he is entitled to an attorney general who has his trust and confidence, and he hasn't had that. He hasn't had it from day one.
Was called the former president's wingman. I mean, that's the kind of language that they were using.
Look at the relationship Nixon and Mitchell had, even though Mitchell went to jail. Bobby and Jack Kennedy.
Well, that's a little different because that was familial, but yes, close.
The best Justice Departments have been run when there is this close relationship between them, so they each know what the other's doing. And Donald Trump hasn't had that.
Well, and it's created the situation where you can't get certain documents, with Rudy Giuliani saying, if I don't get those DOJ documents, that's a deal breaker for sitting down. Does complicated equal compromised? I guess is where we're going with this.
I hope not. There have been some accusations against Rod Rosenstein that he is doing things at the behest of the president so that he won't get fired, even though those things are not, technically speaking, consistent with DOJ policy. That's where complicated gets compromised. Is he compromising his integrity? Is he compromising the quasi-independence of the DOJ to reply to the president's tweets?
Wow. I'll leave it there.
Right.
And so will you. Judge, great to see you. Thank you.
Pleasure, Harris.
Stocks are down today as the White House has announced it will end tariff exemptions on steel and aluminum for the EU, Canada, and Mexico. What Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross is saying about the further negotiations as the EU vows retaliation. President Trump is announcing sweeping new tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from Canada, Mexico, and the European Union. This all reportedly stemming from the president's frustration with what he calls unfair practices by our trading partners. The EU is promising to respond with levies. That's retaliation. Up to $7 billion. Mexico promising a similar retaliation. Let's bring in now Making Money host Charles Payne from Fox Business Network. This is making news right now. So Representative Kevin Brady, leading House Republican, says that the president, the Trump administration should provide answers to U.S. lawmakers about indiscriminate harm these tariffs are causing our local businesses. What's happening?
Yeah, Kevin Brady, I'm not surprised by his comments. It's early on when we were talking about different resolutions to this. Some of his answers included things that I thought actually would harm American consumers, particularly on a lower retail level. But the bottom line is what people were saying is like, hey, you know what? This is misguided. Kevin Brady saying these aren't our real enemies. The real enemy, of course, is China when it comes to unfair trade. Very few Republicans would push back against that. I think you got two things working right here, though. One that doesn't go talked about much, and it's sort of disingenuous when people say, well, we don't get a lot of steel from China. We do get a lot of industrial metals that are shipped either to Mexico or Canada and then shipped on to us. We like to close those loopholes up. We like, because they know about it. We're not being honest about that. And also, let's face it, we're going into key critical parts of negotiations with China on trade, North Korea, and we're trying to revamp NAFTA. I think this is circling back to the idea that President Trump, where the narrative was becoming his bark was a lot worse than his bite, never following up on these threats, finally saying to the world, hey, I will follow up on these threats right again ahead of these